We begin with the turmoil in Nepal. Protests have forced Prime Minister Oli to quit. What does this political collapse mean for India? New Delhi is surrounded by chaos. We will discuss India's neighbourhood challenge. And Nepal is a prime example. 15 governments in 17 years. We look at why its democracy remains so fragile. Plus a domestic story with big impact. GST reforms are here, but will the industry actually lower prices for you, the consumer? Also in focus, Donald Trump's aide attacks BRICS. He's called them vampires sucking blood. As the US locks horns with Venezuela, is China stepping in? In Europe, the French government has collapsed. The Prime Minister has resigned. What does it mean for President Emmanuel Macron? And a special report on Europe's defense boom, how war is turning startups into engines of innovation. Back home, India has elected a new vice president today. His name is C.P. Radhakrishnan. And finally, a health crisis hiding in plain sight. Diabetes is deadly, underrated and often undiagnosed. All this and more coming up. The headlines first. Israel strikes Hamas officials in Qatar's capital Doha. Homes of several senior Hamas members residing in the Gulf country were hit. The Palestinian group claims Israel targeted its negotiators who were working on a Gaza truce deal. Qatar has condemned the airstrike, while Iran, which backs Hamas, called it a gross violation of all international rules. Thailand's Supreme Court sends Thaksin Shinawatra to jail for a year, rules that the former Prime Minister had improperly served his prison term in hospital. Thaksin Shinawatra went into exile after his second term was cut short by a military coup. In 2023, he returned to Thailand after 15 years and was sentenced to 8 years for corruption and abuse of power. Prime Minister Narendra Modi conducts an aerial survey of flood-hit Punjab. The state is witnessing its worst deluge since 1988. Earlier, Prime Minister Modi visited Himachal Pradesh, which has also been battling floods and landslides. The Prime Minister has announced relief packages for both the states. Poland closes its border with Belarus. It's in response to the upcoming Russian-Belarusian war games, which will begin on Friday. Belarus, a former Soviet republic, is a key Russian ally. The drills come amid fears among several Eastern European countries of a possible military build-up in Belarus. And Ethiopia inaugurates Africa's biggest dam. Its Prime Minister called it a great achievement for all black people. But the hydroelectric project has angered downstream nation Egypt, which has sent a letter of protest to the United Nations Security Council. It's chaos in the Himalayas. The tiny country of Nepal has been gripped by violence. The parliament was on fire. Ministers were thrashed on the streets. The Supreme Court was torched and the capital of Kathmandu was overrun. This wasn't just a protest. It was a total upheaval. The biggest exit came around noon today. Prime Minister K.P. Sharma Oli announced his resignation. He simply couldn't hang on. Oli had unleashed a crackdown on Monday. It was the worst in Nepal's recent history. 19 protesters were killed, plus at least 100 were injured. And today the backlash was evident. Thousands of protesters hit the streets of Nepal. Oli's own private residence was torched. Take a look. The Prime Minister had no choice. He announced his resignation later in the day. He said he was quitting to allow a political solution to the crisis. Soon afterwards, an army helicopter was seen over his house. It ferried Oli away from the chaos. To where? Well, nobody knows yet. But what exactly is the root of this crisis and how did it escalate so fast? The trigger was a social media ban. Last week, Kathmandu blocked 26 online platforms, including Instagram and Facebook. In response, thousands of young Nepalese hit the streets. Now, Nepal, as you would know, is a young country. Around 43% of the population is below 40 years of age. So the protesters were largely Gen Z. And their complaints were not limited to social media.
जुन ये जो हुआ है ना, ये इतना कुछ ये सोशल बैंडिंग के लेके नहीं हुआ है. हम लोगों को चाहिए यूथ लीडर चाहिए. अब हम लोग परिवर्तन खोज रहे हैं. ये बूढ़े लोग है ना, ये बूढ़े लीडर है ना, वो हम लोग अब वक्त हो गया है. अब नहीं चाहिए, हमारा यूथ चाहिए अब.
Every corruption in the country, from the local level to federal level, all the Nepalese citizens are fed up of corruption. Every youth are going outside the country, so we want to protect our youth and make the country's economy better.
We'll deal with the issues in detail, but first let's look at how the chaos unfolded. On Monday, the government stood firm. They imposed a curfew in parts of Kathmandu. They also repelled protesters with water cannons and bullets. We're talking live ammunition here, not rubber pellets. That crackdown killed 19 protesters. But the government miscalculated. The deaths added to the public anger, and today things escalated even more. Oli tried to salvage the situation. He even lifted the ban on those social media platforms, but it was too late. The protests had spiraled out of control. Important government buildings were set on fire, like the Parliament and the Supreme Court. Take a look. The anger was also directed at ministers. Nepal's finance minister was chased through the streets. He was thrashed and stripped by a mob. The foreign minister was also targeted. Her name is Arzu Devba. She's also the wife of Nepal's former Prime Minister Sher Bahadur Devba. Both of them were attacked by a mob. The former Prime Minister was seen covered in blood. And here's the thing. It wasn't just the ruling parties either. Even the opposition was targeted in this protest. Nepal's ousted coalition had two major parties, Oli's Communist Party and the Nepali Congress. The opposition is led by another communist faction. Their top leader is Pushp Kamal Dahal. And his house was also attacked. So basically, no one was spared. Today's protests targeted Nepal's entire ruling class. It was an outpouring of pent-up anger against corruption, against lack of jobs, and against political instability. Now, we cannot defend the violent methods that they chose, certainly not the mob attacks. But they do show the level of frustration, of anger and disappointment. And as with any upheaval, now comes the most important question. What happens next? The Nepalese army is trying to control things. They are protecting some of the ministers. The army also released a statement hours ago. And here's what it says. We request all to remain calm, maintain social harmony and uphold national unity. We earnestly appeal to the entire Nepali army, the youth and the general public to stay united and disciplined. The president too has released a statement. He is urging the protesters to not cause further damage. He wants them to come to the table, basically to find a political solution. Now, earlier today, some reports claimed that the president had also resigned. But as it turned out, that is not the case. Fake news tends to be rampant during such crises. As always, we promise to be accurate. At First Post, we prioritize facts over sensationalism, which brings us to the ground situation at the moment. There were protests and celebrations late into the evening. Nepalese youth continued to clash with riot cops. Airports are also closed. No carriers are flying into or out of Nepal. Several countries have also issued travel advisories. They're asking citizens to exercise caution. Right now, the focus is on stability, to return order to the streets of Kathmandu. And the long-term goal? Well, that's a lot more complicated. The president is asking Oli and his cabinet to stay on as caretakers. It is not clear if the protesters will accept that. Also, they want younger leaders. But where will these Gen Z politicians come from? A couple of names are doing the rounds. One is Balendra Shah. He is the mayor of Kathmandu. More importantly, he is a 35-year-old former rapper, someone who can understand the Gen Z. Another leader is Rabi Lamichane. He is a former deputy prime minister, but he was jailed over alleged corruption. And today, the protesters freed him from prison. They also waited patiently for him to address the crowd. Again, Lamichane is not as old as his colleagues. He's just 51 years old. And we don't know which way Nepal will go next. Maybe the unrest will die down, or maybe they will escalate again tomorrow. All we can say is this: the next 42 hours will be absolutely crucial. What happens in this time will shape Nepal's future. It's something we've seen before. Staging a revolution is the easier part. Preserving it is much harder. It's Nepal today. It was Bangladesh and Sri Lanka before. Different triggers, same outcome. And stuck in the middle, India. Our neighborhood has been gripped by constant chaos. You've got public unrest, civil wars, de facto military rulers, radical regimes, you name it, and South Asia has it. But what does this instability mean for India? And how can India navigate it? Let's look at the scale of the problem. To our south is Sri Lanka. In 2022, the island was sinking under debt. People could not afford medicines or fuel or food. On cue, massive protests broke out. The ruling Rajapaksas were forced to flee Sri Lanka. Even the presidential palace was overrun. To our east is Bangladesh. I'm sure that memory is still fresh. Last year, massive student protests broke out in Dhaka. The trigger, a controversial quota. Soon, radical groups joined in. They turned this movement into a rebellion. Within days, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina was forced to flee to India. Then you have Myanmar. In 2021, their elected government was toppled. The military took control of Myanmar. Today, the country is gripped by a civil war. Dozens of armed ethnic groups are battling the army. On paper, an election is expected later this year. If you move north, you have Nepal. We've already told you what's happening there. And if you move west, there is Pakistan. There is no need to topple their prime minister because he is powerless. Pakistan is effectively ruled by the army chief. He manages both foreign and economic policy. And his sole mission is to foment trouble in India. Above Pakistan is Afghanistan. The Taliban regime has been friendly to India. But remember, this is still the Taliban, a regressive, radical, and oppressive group. You cannot count on them as a reliable partner. And in the middle of this chaos is India. It is the exact opposite of what we just described: a stable democracy, a civilian leadership, and a thriving economy. The question is, how will this regional instability affect India? In mainly two ways. Number one, India shares a border with some of these countries. We also share ethnic ties, so a crisis in the neighborhood can trigger border issues. Refugees may spill over into India. Bad actors may try to find safe haven here, and this poses a security challenge. Prime Minister Modi spoke about it recently. He said infiltrators are trying to alter Indian demographics. Next is factor number two. It is the unwritten rule of geopolitics. Good neighbors help you thrive, bad neighbors drag you down. Just look at prosperous countries around the world, the US and Canada, France and Germany after World War II, the Nordic nations like Sweden and Denmark, ASEAN countries like Singapore and Malaysia. All of them thrived because their neighborhood was calm. If not, things may have been different. And the logic is obvious. Stable neighborhood equals stable borders. Stable borders allow you to focus on more important things like education, healthcare, and trade. Basically, this chaos is an unnecessary distraction. In Nepal's case, India has reacted. Let me quote from New Delhi's statement. As a close friend and neighbor, we hope that all concerned will exercise restraint and address any issues through peaceful means and dialogue. So India is clearly worried. It doesn't want another neighbor to collapse. But what can New Delhi do about it? Well, India is not America. We do not meddle in our neighbors' business. We do not mistake that, but do not mistake that for a lack of interest or a lack of responsibility. When requested, India has always stepped up to help. When East Pakistan was being oppressed, India liberated it. When Nepal was drafting its constitution, India gave inputs. When Sri Lanka was in debt, India gave billions in aid. So New Delhi's priority is clear. We need stability in the neighborhood. Yes, we have resources and assistance to give, but our most powerful asset is our lived experience, our record as a mature democracy. If India with 1.4 billion people can do it, so can Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and others. When we talk about democracy, Nepal's story is anything but straightforward. For decades, the country has been in constant flux. It drifted through feudalism, slid into autocracy, and has since struggled with a fragile democracy. The monarchy was once the soul of Nepal, and in the year 2001, King Birendra stood as its symbol. He wanted to open the kingdom. He wanted more democracy in Nepal, but his own family did not share that vision. And then tragedy struck. On June 1st that year, his son, Crown Prince Dipendra, walked into a family gathering. He opened fire, killing 8 members of his own bloodline. This included his father, the king. And then he turned the gun on himself. In a bizarre turn, Dipendra was proclaimed king while in a coma. His so-called reign lasted just 3 days. He died too. And his uncle Gyanendra took the throne. For a while, Nepal remained a constitutional monarchy. But in 2005, Gyanendra tore up that promise. He dismissed the parliament, he locked up politicians and journalists, he declared an emergency and seized power for himself. Nepal fought back. Thousands poured into the streets and their message was clear: the king must go. And he finally did. He was forced to step down in 2006. Then in 2008, the monarchy was abolished. And since then, Nepal has been a secular republic. But here's the problem. There has been no stability in Nepal. They've seen 14 governments in the last 17 years. 15 if you count the fall of the current Oli government. That's 15 governments in 17 years in Nepal. It is like a revolving door of coalition politics. Prime ministers come and go, ousted leaders return only to be toppled again. Alliances are forged, then they are broken. And with each turn, each regime seems even more fragile, more incapable than the last one. This has left Nepal in a constant state of flux. And obviously that has consequences. Inflation is soaring and corruption runs rampant. In fact, these protests were about corruption too. The trigger was the social media ban, but the protesters said that they were fed up of the corruption. The unemployment rate is 12.6%. It is even higher among the youth in the age group of 15 to 29. Unemployment in Nepal is at 20%. More than 70,000 Nepalis left the country more than 700,000, I'm sorry. 700,000 people left the country from 2023 to 2024. This was in search of jobs and a better life. Last year, an average of 65,000 people, 65,000 young people from Nepal left the country every month. Yes, that's 65,000 every month. They went abroad to look for jobs. Now, that's a very high number for a country of 30 million. That makes Nepal heavily dependent on remittances. In fact, 33% of their GDP comes from personal remittances, a number that has gone up rapidly in the last 30 years. So the economy literally runs on the money sent back by those who left. The youth are frustrated. They see no jobs, no fair opportunities, and no future at home. And this frustration has boiled over. Another trigger were the so-called Nepo kids. Now, these are children of politicians and powerful bureaucrats. Ordinary youth are leaving the country to work abroad, but these Nepo kids are flexing designer clothes, showing off luxury cars and posing at beach resorts in the Maldives and Paris cafes. It is a blatant display of privilege. And for many Nepalis, that has become the last straw. What we are seeing is not just a rejection of one government or one party, it is an open revolt against nepotism, against political elitism and decades of impunity. A whole generation is now asking, why should they struggle for dignity while the children of the powerful live like royalty? And in that question lies the real crisis of Nepal's democracy. Nepal wanted democracy to be a promise of freedom, but for many, it has become a cycle of disappointment. The dream was that power would rest with the people. Instead, it remains trapped in the hands of a few. The monarchy is gone, but the mindset of entitlement remains. And until that changes, Nepal's democracy will remain fragile. Now to India, where a major economic shift is underway. It's about the GST, that's India's goods and services tax. This is the country's main consumption tax. Last week, the government rolled out big changes. GST rates were cut across the board. It covers 99% of all goods and services used in India. They're covered in the reform, 99%. Now, after this reform, they're supposed to get cheaper. The new rates come into effect on the 22nd of September. But there is a catch. Industry leaders are not celebrating yet. They are, in fact, worried about these tax cuts. They're not sure how this will work in practice and if they can actually pass on the benefits to consumers. Many industry leaders are skeptical. They fear that their own costs could go up. And at the center of this concern is something called the input tax credit. Now, what's the input tax credit? Let me try and explain that. India has slashed GST rates across sectors, from dairy and education supplies to life-saving drugs and insurance. In theory, this should make goods cheaper. But in practice, the relief may never reach consumers, and here is why. When a business pays tax on its raw materials, it claims it back. That refund is called the input tax credit, or ITC. It helps avoid double taxation. So as a business, you pay tax only on the value that you add and not on the entire supply chain. But now that system is being stretched. Many finished goods, from notebooks to paneer, are now taxed at 0% GST on the finished product. But the inputs that go into them, the raw materials that go into them, still attract 18% GST. So manufacturers may not be able to recover the taxes that they pay. Here's another example. Earlier, paneer or Indian cottage cheese was taxed at 5%. If you're a manufacturer, you could claim tax credit on packaging, on transport, and on storage. But now paneer is exempt. The GST is gone. But so is the tax credit. That is also gone. The tax refund you got on stuff like packaging, transport, and storage of paneer is gone. And that is a problem, because this extra cost will now come out of the manufacturer's pocket. They would end up paying more tax. They won't be able to pass it on or pass on the benefits to the consumers. So there will be no real price drop for you, the buyer. That is the fear. And this applies to industries like healthcare, education, insurance, and some parts of real estate and FMCG. that is fast-moving consumer goods, your daily items. These are the industries raising concerns. They say they may not be able to reduce their prices if the tax credits are gone. And this could defeat the main purpose of the reform, because the idea was quite simple: cut taxes and bring down prices of goods and services. This is one of the biggest selling points of the reform. Today, India has 4 tax slabs: 5, 12, 18 and 28%. The plan is to remove 2 slabs, 12 and 28%. So most goods will be taxed at 5 or 18%.
I'll give you this number which is important. 99% of all the goods and services which are touched by GST are now either in 0 or in 5 or in 18.
That's right.
There's nothing beyond. So that 1% is what makes for the demerit goods, right, which popular parlance says sin goods.
Yeah.
A small selection of items like luxury and sin goods will be taxed differently. We're talking about goods like tobacco. They will face a 40% tax. The new system rolls out on the 22nd of November. Like I said, that's 22nd of September. That's 13 days from now. So the government has time to address these concerns. Reports say officials are holding meetings. Bureaucrats from different ministries are exploring solutions, and more clarity could emerge in the days ahead. You see, GST reforms are a bet on India's economic resilience. The fact that Indian consumers can step up and mitigate the impact of global shocks, like the trade war and sluggish global growth projections. India remains the world's fastest growing major economy. We grew at 7.8% in the last quarter. That's an encouraging number. But India cannot afford complacency at this point, because there are points of concern too. For instance, the demand for gold is down. It has dropped by more than 25%. That's the sharpest decline in 3 years. And it breaks the usual pattern. Traditionally, Indian families buy gold during the festive season. It is seen as auspicious. For generations, gold has been a way to store wealth, a safety net for the future. So what has changed this time? Well, the prices are too high. Gold prices have jumped 49% compared to last year. That could be one reason people are holding back. But there may be some relief ahead. The GST cut could free up household budgets. Families may save more on daily spending. That could boost overall sentiment, maybe even revive the demand for gold. As always, it all comes down to one thing: implementation. On paper, these reforms are great, but the real test lies in how they're brought into practice.
This is News 18 Network. India's largest news network.
Joining us here on CNN News 18, huge story breaking in the neighborhood. The Nepalese Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli, who's been a sort of a semi-permanent fixture in Nepali politics over the last 30 years, he has now tendered in his resignation. His current government, I think this is his third stint in power, his current government, which was an uneasy coalition between him, the Nepali Congress, and a section of the Maoist party. It was an uneasy coalition that had been in power for the last year or so now, and now, given these massive scale protests that we've seen, led by young people, the trigger being, of course, the social media ban, but it goes far beyond that. Issues of corruption, unemployment, privileges, dynastic politics, curbs on young people speaking their mind, all of this sort of came into a deadly cocktail. It came into a deadly combination, which finally ended up consuming the current Prime Minister, Mr. Oli, who has tendered in his resignation. The latest information that we have is that Mr. Oli has been given safe escort by an army chopper. Him and his immediate family members have been taken to an army barrack where they will be kept for some time. CNN News 18 broke this story first to you. We were the first ones to tell you that Mr. Oli has put in his papers. He has officially sent in his resignation to the Nepalese president, Mr. Paudel, whose resignation has now been accepted at 12:05 p.m. We told you about Mr. Oli planning to step down. It was clear earlier this morning itself. The RSP party quit, 4 ministers quit, the writing on the wall was clear as day to the Nepalese Prime Minister that he's fast losing support and he needs to step down. At 2:16 p.m. officially, KP Sharma Oli, Prime Minister of Nepal, put in his papers and stepped down as Prime Minister after being given safe passage by the military, an assurance of safe passage by the Nepal Army Chief. Let me go across to Darshan, who's a Nepali journalist, who is joining us live from Kathmandu. Darshan, so Mr. Oli, the long-serving Prime Minister of Nepal, has finally quit. Do we know where he is? He's apparently been taken in an army helicopter to some safe passage. And what happens next, Darshan? Who becomes the next Prime Minister? What is the next government going to be like? Is there any word about what is happening?
So there is a lot of protest right now. Like though I'm in a hope in a safe place right now, I can hear a lot of screaming and the cloud which is filled with the smoke. So I'm not sure which are the buildings that has been into fire, but yeah, the PM Oli finally resigned. But it's not about a new government. It's a generational war. Like I mentioned earlier, Gen Z are like crazy, and there is also a lot of riots that's happening. And there is no one to take a lead at this time. But Gen Z are also looking after Balin to come forward to control this chaos. Because right now there are protesters inside parliamentary building, inside the Singha Darbar, where all the ministries used to handle their places, and there are also many data centers that have very critical information. And right now there is no presence of the government.
It's easy to defend a good policy. You can rely on logic and facts. But a bad policy? Well, you must resort to attacks and name-calling. Just ask Donald Trump's trade advisor. His name is Peter Navarro. His day job is to advise Trump on tariffs, but on the side, he specializes in name-calling. Navarro's latest? He's calling BRICS countries vampires. First, listen to what he said.
The bottom line is that none of these countries can survive if they don't sell to the United States. And when they sell to the United States, their exports, they're like vampires sucking our blood dry with their unfair trade practices. But I don't see how the BRICS stay together since historically, they all hate each other and kill each other.
Vampires live forever, but Navarro says BRICS will not last. Clearly, he's never seen vampire movies. But on a serious note, why this hatred towards BRICS? Well, the fact is, it's not new. Even before taking office, Donald Trump had attacked BRICS. He called it an anti-American bloc. He also issued a threat to BRICS nations. Don't challenge the US dollar. If you try, you will face 100% tariffs. That's what Trump said. And while this approach is new, the objective is not. Washington sees BRICS as a challenge to the US-led order. They feel it will undermine the US dollar and the Western economic system. So no US president would like to see the BRICS thrive. Like I said, the only difference is the approach. Other presidents tried to weaken the bloc's unity. How? Through divide and conquer. They built close ties with founding members of BRICS, countries like India and Brazil. But Donald Trump is doing the opposite. His highest tariffs have been imposed on India and Brazil, 50% on both nations, which makes you wonder, what is the strategy? Is Trump unwittingly boosting BRICS? Well, we have to say the signs are all there. Yesterday, BRICS leaders held a virtual summit. It was convened by Brazil's President Lula da Silva. Other heads of state also attended, like President Putin of Russia, President Xi Jinping of China, President Ramaphosa of South Africa, President El-Sisi of Egypt, President Pezeshkian of Iran, and President Subianto of Indonesia. Interestingly, Prime Minister Modi of India did not attend. In his place, Foreign Minister Jaishankar represented India. This meeting was convened to discuss Trump's tariffs. BRICS nations face the worst of it. India and Brazil, like I said, face 50%, China and South Africa 30%, Indonesia 19%, which is why they gathered to discuss a joint response. Jaishankar did not mention the tariffs, but he called for fair and transparent trade.
The world, as a collective, is seeking a stable and predictable environment for trade and investment. At the same time, it is imperative that economic practices are fair, transparent, and to everyone's benefit.
Others were more blunt. Lula accused Trump of using tariff as blackmail. He said the US was meddling in domestic affairs. Ramaphosa also criticized the unilateral tariffs. He said that they would hurt the global south. And Xi Jinping? Well, he took the opportunity to push for alternatives. Xi called for building an open global economy.
No matter how the international situation changes, we must remain steadfast in promoting the building of an open global economy, sharing opportunities and achieving win-win results through openness.
So what is the BRICS plan? They know that Trump is not de-escalating. He's shutting off the US market to BRICS exports. So the bloc is looking at alternatives like increasing trade within the BRICS market. And on paper, it should work. After all, the BRICS countries make up 56% of the global population. They also make up 44% of global GDP. So technically, they can cushion the tariff impact. What they need is political will. Until now, that was missing. India had its own reservations about BRICS. They felt it was becoming a Chinese club. The question is, have those reservations been addressed? Well, yes and no. India is certainly rekindling with China. It is also boosting its partnership with Russia. But the old concerns remain, which is why Prime Minister Modi did not attend yesterday's BRICS meeting. Of course, that could still change if Trump does not relax the tariff pressure, if his officials do not stop the daily attacks, then India may shed its ambivalence. For years, BRICS struggled to find relevance and unity. Now it may have found the catalyst in Donald Trump. The South Pacific, the Caribbean, the edges of Latin America, for more than a century, this watery expanse has been Washington's backyard. But now a Chinese ship is set to slip into those waters. This is not a destroyer or a carrier. This is a hospital ship. It is called the CNS Silk Road Ark. On the face of it, it looks harmless, a floating ship making goodwill stops. But the timing is suspect. As we speak, the US and Venezuela are engaged in a standoff, and now China is making an entry. So how is China involved here? What is their role? What is the message they're trying to send? Tonight, we'll break it down, starting with what we know about this Chinese ship. It was commissioned in 2024. It is basically a hospital ship. It has spent years zigzagging across Africa and Asia, treating tens of thousands of patients. In early September, it left for a new mission, the Harmony 2025 mission. As part of this, the ship will travel to South Pacific and Latin America. And what's the purpose? Well, according to China, and I'm quoting, this mission aims to strengthen friendly cooperation between China and relevant countries. And why is this news? Because this region is a powder keg right now. Tensions between the US and Venezuela are high. The US has dispatched a squadron of warships. Officially, it's about combating drug cartels, the groups that move cocaine and other narcotics across the Caribbean and North America. The American action apparently is to counter those. But Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro says that this is not about drugs. This is about regime change in his country. He has called the American warships a threat. He says Washington is trying to destabilize his government. So he has mobilized his army. Maduro has called millions of reservists to defend the homeland. Last week, the US carried out a strike. It blew up what it called a Venezuelan drug boat. The attack killed 11 people. Days later, Washington upped the stakes again. It deployed F-35 fighter jets to Puerto Rico. US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth even visited a US warship in the Caribbean.
to the sailors.
Venezuela has not hit back yet, but it says everything is fair game. It has asked the US to abandon plans of regime change in Caracas.
The government of the United States should abandon its plan of violent regime change in Venezuela and in all of Latin America and the Caribbean and respect sovereignty, the right to peace, to independence.
Basically, things are escalating between the US and Venezuela, and in the middle of it, this Chinese ship is sailing in. Beijing says this mission was planned before, and it's just a hospital ship. But in geopolitics, coincidence is often choreographed. Because here is the heart of the matter. Venezuela survives on Chinese oxygen. This country runs on oil exports. Nearly 90% of Venezuela's crude goes to China. Over the last 2 decades, Beijing has lent Caracas more than $60 billion, $60 billion. So for Maduro, China is not just a partner, it is the only major power willing to do business with him. And the Venezuelan president made it apparent when he flaunted his Chinese phone.
Impressive. I find out everything through this. The phone that Xi Jinping gave me. Look, Xi Jinping gave me this, a Huawei, the best phone in the world, the Huawei, and the Americans can't hack it, neither their spy planes, nor their satellites.
So what happens next? Well, 3 scenarios loom. 1, escalation. The war rhetoric escalates, dragging the region into crisis. China watches carefully, perhaps offering Maduro moral support, but staying out of the line of fire. 2, a stalemate. Washington keeps up the pressure, Caracas keeps up the bluster, and the Silk Road arc cruises from port to port. 3, China plays mediator. It is the least likely, but the most interesting scenario. Beijing has leverage over Venezuela's oil, so it is uniquely positioned to nudge Maduro into talks. But would Xi Jinping spend political capital to play peacemaker in America's hemisphere? Well, that's the big question. As of today, this is where things stand. The US still commands the Caribbean military, but China is planting seeds. For Washington, it means headaches. For Latin America, it means options. And for Venezuela, it means survival. Our next story is from France, where President Macron is grappling with another crisis. He's had 5 prime ministers in less than 2 years and 7 since 2017. His latest appointment, François Bayrou, lasted just 9 months. Yesterday, he faced a trust vote in Parliament. It ended in crushing defeat for him. The Prime Minister resigned earlier today, so Macron's task is cut out. He must pick a new Prime Minister, and he's not spoiled for choice. Meanwhile, opposition parties are baying for blood. They want a snap election or Macron's resignation. And this has spilled onto the streets. There's a movement called Block Everything. There are trade unions preparing for strikes, and there are financial markets that are nervous and credit ratings agencies that are watching. So can Macron navigate this new crisis? Our next report explores.
This is François Bayrou. He was the Prime Minister of France for just 9 months. His government has now been ousted. Bayrou called for a high-risk confidence vote in the Parliament on Monday. He was defeated decisively. 364 lawmakers voted against him. Only 194 backed him. His plan was to slash France's soaring debt. The country's deficit is nearly double the European Union limit. Debt reportedly stands at 114% of the GDP. Bayrou promised to save $51.5 billion. He proposed scrapping national holidays and freezing welfare payments. He warned that France was like a ship taking on water every day. His message was clear. He said the biggest risk was doing nothing. But his words failed to convince lawmakers. His ideas sparked outrage across the political spectrum. The left and the far right united to bring him down. Bayrou became the first French premier in modern history to be ousted this way.
I think we have shown an image of the Republic that is honorable and active. And so, from that point of view, I wanted, on behalf of the government, to thank the National Assembly and, as Prime Minister, to thank the members of the government.
Et c'est le cas exactement pour l'ensemble de la vie politique.
He has submitted his resignation to President Emmanuel Macron, plunging the country into a fresh political crisis. President Macron must now choose a new prime minister. It will be his fifth in less than 2 years, and his seventh since he first took office in 2017. The frequent changes reveal the depth of France's instability. France has a hung parliament. No party can command a majority. Every budget is a battle. Every decision is a test. In this fractured landscape, the choice of a new prime minister becomes critical. Reports suggest Defense Minister Sébastien Lecornu is one possible choice. Another option might be Finance Minister Eric Lombard. Justice Minister Gerald Darmanin has also been mentioned. The Health Minister Catherine Vautrin is a contender too. Macron could even attempt cohabitation by reaching across the aisle. But none of these choices guarantees stability. The Socialist Party is demanding its turn to govern. Its leader Olivier Faure has called for a break with the policies of the last 8 years. Meanwhile, the far-right National Rally is calling for snap elections. Marine Le Pen insists fresh polls are the only way out. On the far left, Jean-Luc Mélenchon wants Macron himself to resign. Macron has so far rejected both the demands. The French president says he will appoint a new premier within days. But the clock is ticking. Besides, France is also bracing for unrest. A movement called Block Everything has announced nationwide protests. Demonstrations are planned this week. Trade unions have called for strikes on the 18th of September. Tens of thousands of police officers are now on standby. Authorities fear roads and rail lines could be blocked, and they warn of possible violence. Meanwhile, financial markets are also watching closely. Fitch Ratings will review France's credit standing this week. Moody's and S&P Global follow in the coming months. A downgrade could add to France's debt burden. For now, Emmanuel Macron faces one of the toughest choices of his presidency. What happens next is unclear. But if another government collapses, Macron may have little choice but to dissolve parliament. That could then trigger early elections, which could open the door for the far right or the far left to make significant gains. And the outcome could shape France's political direction ahead of the 2027 presidential race.
Europe is witnessing a transformation, one that is reshaping how it thinks about security and technology. The reason is the war in Ukraine. The focus is on defense spending and innovation. Venture capitalists are pumping in billions, startups are turning labs into war factories, and veterans are swapping uniforms for business suits. This is a continent that once outsourced its defense to America. Now it is trying to shoulder the burden itself. The numbers tell the story. In 2021, defense startups in Europe raised just $176 million. But since the war began, the same sector is pulling in billions, about $2.8 billion since 2022 and $1.6 billion of that in just the last 7 months. Here's another analysis. It puts 2024 investment alone at more than $5 billion. That's 5 times the level before the war. And where is this money going? To all kinds of projects, from drones and unmanned submarines to AI software that can map a battlefield in real time. Reports say Germany is leading the way. It is the biggest supplier of military support to Ukraine after the US. Now look at the German startup called Helsing. It is now valued at more than $12 billion. Same story in Britain. Defense companies there are expanding. Players like TechEver and Stark are building new factories. The aim is to scale up production and attack and reconnaissance drones. But this is not just a story of investors. It is also about the people leading these companies. Many of them are military veterans, people who know what fails on the front line and how to fix it. You see, Europe has 80 plus defense startups today, according to one report, and veterans lead a quarter of them. We are talking about companies like Quantum Systems in Germany, CybSafe in Britain, Frankenberg Technologies in Estonia, and Terminal Autonomy in Ukraine. They're all led by former soldiers. And this boom is also shaped by politics. Europe is deepening its support for Ukraine. Last week, President Macron of France announced a multinational force. More than 24 countries have pledged troops. They will be deployed in Ukraine after a peace deal whenever it comes. Such commitments are adding to the momentum. At the same time, pressure is rising from Washington. President Trump has threatened to cut funding. He does not want to support security programs in Europe, especially for countries bordering Russia. He wants NATO allies to foot the bill. And the result is this. NATO defense budgets are rising. Europe is paying for American weapons. And it's also investing in its own startups. For investors, this means a long-term pipeline of demand, a gold rush, if you will. For Europe, it means a crucial, dependable source of weapons. And make no mistake, this is not just about drones or investment figures. This is about Europe's survival. It marks a strategic shift where Europe, as I said, is shouldering the burden of its own security and relying less on the United States. For now, demand is soaring, innovation is booming, and NATO spending is at record levels. But the real test is still to come. What happens when the urgency of war fades, when the headlines move on, and the pressure to innovate eases? Ukraine may have triggered the shift. The question is, can Europe turn a wartime surge into a long-term strategy? Or will this defense tech revolution end the moment the guns go silent?
This is News 18 Network. India's largest news network.
Joining us here on CNN News 18, huge story breaking in the neighborhood. The Nepalese Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli, who's been a sort of a semi-permanent fixture in Nepali politics over the last 30 years, he has now tendered in his resignation. His current government, I think this is his third stint in power, his current government, which was an uneasy coalition between him, the Nepali Congress, and a section of the Maoist party. It was an uneasy coalition that had been in power for the last year or so now. And now, given these massive scale protests that we've seen, led by young people, the trigger being, of course, the social media ban, but it goes far beyond that. Issues of corruption, unemployment, privileges, dynastic politics, curbs on young people speaking their mind, all of this sort of came into a deadly cocktail. It came into a deadly combination, which finally ended up consuming the current Prime Minister, Mr. Oli, who has tendered in his resignation. The latest information that we have is that Mr. Oli has been given safe escort by an army chopper. Him and his immediate family members have been taken to an army barrack where they will be kept for some time. CNN News 18 broke this story first to you. We were the first ones to tell you that Mr. Oli has put in his papers. He has officially sent in his resignation to the Nepalese president, Mr. Paudel, whose resignation has now been accepted. At 12:05 p.m., we told you about Mr. Oli planning to step down. It was clear earlier this morning itself. The RSP party quit, 4 ministers quit. The writing on the wall was clear as day to the Nepalese Prime Minister that he's fast losing support and he needs to step down. At 2:16 p.m., officially, KP Sharma Oli, Prime Minister of Nepal, put in his papers and stepped down as Prime Minister after being given safe passage by the military, an assurance of safe passage by the Nepal Army Chief. Let me go across to Darshan, who's a Nepali journalist, who is joining us live from Kathmandu. Darshan, so Mr. Oli, the long-serving Prime Minister of Nepal, has finally quit. Do we know where he is? He's apparently been taken in an army helicopter to some safe passage. And what happens next, Darshan? Who becomes the next Prime Minister? What is the next government going to be like? Is there any word about what is happening?
So there is a lot of protest right now. Like though I'm in a hope in safe place right now, I can hear a lot of screaming and the cloud which is filled with the smoke. So I'm not sure which are the buildings that has been into fire. But yeah, the PM Oli finally resigned, but it's not about a new government. It's a generational war. Like I mentioned earlier, Gen Z are like crazy, and there is also a lot of riots that's happening. And there is no one to take a lead at this time. But Gen Z are also, looking after balance to come forward to control this chaos. Because right now there are protesters inside parliamentary building, inside the Singh Darbar where all the ministries used to have.
Who was the most watched person at the US Open final? Not Carlos Alcaraz, not Yannick Sinner. It was a man who did not even touch a racket. Donald Trump. He entered the stadium like he was seed number 1. The crowd responded with a perfect mix of cheers and boos. For nearly 3 hours, the tennis was electric, but the real show was Trump's face. When Alcaraz lifted the trophy, the crowd roared, but Trump looked quite displeased. Was he rooting for Sinner? Did he think Alcaraz came without a proper visa? Either way, tennis had a champion, but the internet had a punchline. Take a look.
This is News 18 Network. India's largest news network.
Joining us here on CNN News 18, huge story breaking in the neighborhood. The Nepalese Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli, who's been a semi-permanent fixture in Nepali politics over the last 30 years, he has now tendered in his resignation. His current government, I think this is his third stint in power, his current government, which was an uneasy coalition between him, the Nepali Congress, and a section of the Maoist party. It was an uneasy coalition that had been in power for the last year or so now. And now, given these massive scale protests that we've seen, led by young people, the trigger being, of course, the social media ban, but it goes far beyond that. Issues of corruption, unemployment, privileges, dynastic politics, curbs on young people speaking their mind, all of this sort of came into a deadly cocktail. It came into a deadly combination, which finally ended up consuming the current Prime Minister, Mr. Oli, who has tendered in his resignation. The latest information that we have is that Mr. Oli has been given safe escort by an army chopper. Him and his immediate family members have been taken to an army barrack where they will be kept for some time. CNN News 18 broke this story first to you. We were the first ones to tell you that Mr. Oli has put in his papers. He has officially sent in his resignation to the Nepalese president, Mr. Paudel, whose resignation has now been accepted. At 12:05 p.m., we told you about Mr. Oli planning to step down. It was clear earlier this morning itself. The RSP party quit, 4 ministers quit. The writing on the wall was clear as day to the Nepalese Prime Minister that he's fast losing support and he needs to step down. At 2:16 p.m., officially, KP Sharma Oli, Prime Minister of Nepal, put in his papers and stepped down as Prime Minister after being given safe passage by the military, an assurance of safe passage by the Nepal Army Chief.